It is my joy to be sharing this session with you, a time of reflection and conversation. I would probably prefer to put it as a kind of a reflection together and a conversation together, as opposed to a lecture. But there'll be some aspects of thoughts that perhaps, as I propose them, that you could interact with me and interact with us as we together figure this out. So without further delay, it is my joy to, as part of Alpha Omega International College, in partnership with STM-KL Center, to offer this reflection, Advent reflection on women in the Gospels. I have the honor to direct the reflection on women in the Gospels, women who have encountered the Messiah. So I think we have already talked a little bit about the ministry that Vivian has posed. So I'm going to go straight into quickly one housekeeping matter, which is to actually ask you to, if you have a second device, to have it ready and to scan the QR code for the Slido. We will be going through a series of interactive questions in this time of reflection together. And also, as you answer, then we can also use that as a point of discussion in this time of reflection. Do that, scan it right now, and the first question will come out. Let's do a trial session, which is the first question that I wanted to ask. And if you have already scanned your QR code on your phone or whatever devices to get the Slido page, the first question that I did want to ask is this: who is your favorite woman in the Gospels? I see Abigail, I see some Hannah. They are definitely your favorite women. They may not necessarily appear in the Gospels per se in the New Testament. So, but I appreciate your answer for that. Thank you. So as we move on, okay, I'm going to quickly close this question, and then you can see all the word cloud of all the different answers that has been, all the different responses that has been given. So the one that features prominently is Mary the mother, or Mary as in Mary, the mother of Jesus. Okay, so that's good. We also have descriptions or listings of Martha, Mary, the unnamed woman in Proverbs 31. We also have Mary, sister of Martha, which is similar to what I just mentioned. Queen Esther, Rachel, Tabitha, Priscilla, Lydia, Leah, Deborah. Okay, most of these are women that are found in the New Testament and in the Gospels. There will be others that are in the Old Testament as well. So thank you for your response to this. We will continue on, and we will have more questions. So keep your Slidos, keep your device open. Okay. So I'd like to begin with this first thought for you. I don't think a lot of us have a chance to read the Jewish prayer book, and I've talked about this in the past. The Jewish prayer book, the Siddur, contains the blessings, thanksgivings, and petitions, instructions, theological claims, and historical memories, and also prayers within it. So in this respect, few can rival the 3 lines that begin with, "Blessed are you, O God, King of the universe, who has not made me," and there's a listing of it, and it concludes respectively, a Jewish man thanking God that God has not made him a goy, a Gentile, a slave, and get this, a woman. All right, a woman. Jewish men are supposed to thank God. According to the Jewish men, apparently for them, they should be thankful that they are better off compared to a woman, or that they thank God that they are not a woman. It is in there, and if you do a bit of research, you will find this embedded in the Jewish prayer book of the past. I hope this will not be featured in anyone's Advent prayer for 2020. The Gospel of Luke, however, honors women, and it is clear from Luke's portrayal that women has a special place in Jesus' mission, in Jesus' life, and in Jesus' ministry. There, as you look at it, and in the 19th century commentator, Alfred Plummer, he called the Gospel of Luke as the gospel of womanhood. Can you imagine that? He's uninfluenced by modern movement. He after studying the Gospel of Luke, proclaims that it's the gospel of womanhood. And certainly, as you read the Gospel of Luke, you will find that there are many portrayals, more often than the other gospels, more portrayals of women, Jesus' interaction with them. And so as I reread the gospel in preparation, particularly the Gospel of Luke, in preparation to facilitate this reflection, I've made a list of women that are in the Hall of Fame of Luke Gospel. So there is a list, quite a long list of women that are in the Hall of Fame of this gospel. There were quite some mentions of women in relation to Jesus, either in direct contact, either Jesus' observations, so Jesus using them as an exemplary model for discipleship and for others to learn from. And so Luke also, the Gospel of Luke uniquely also notes several women that the other Gospels do not mention. At least 13 of them appear here and nowhere else. And these women are often examples of deep piety. They run from the gamut of poor to wealthy to those with a past that is now transformed. Let's run through this list very quickly, particularly those that Luke features and details which other gospel that do not do that. So this is the portrayals of women that's particular to Luke's gospel. And we see that, at least 11 of them here and there, and there are many more. It's particular to Luke's gospel. Of course, the nativity scene, the nativity chapter 1 and 2 of Luke portrays Mary and Elizabeth in its unique and very much more in detail attention that's given to the words and emotions and actions of Elizabeth and Mary. There are much more details also in terms of Mary's responses, Mary's prayer, Mary's Magnificat, her song of praise to God, Mary's response. If I mentioned that already, her response, and all that are clearly and very uniquely detailed in the Gospel of Luke that is not seen in other Gospel. And perhaps perhaps much of Luke's details can be attributed to the likelihood that the interviews with Mary and perhaps Elizabeth provided Luke with the first-hand source material of which he can write all that. And these are unique. These opening 3 chapters are unique in the portrayal of Elizabeth and particularly also for Mary. Then we have then we also have the narrative of Anna the prophetess, which appears nowhere else. She is seen to be fulfilled and joyful when she has finally, cradled the Messiah in her hands, and she sings praises to God, for the fulfillment of the prophecy that she's been carrying and holding. And then we have the widow of Nain. How would you describe that? We have the story of this widow whose son died, and Jesus had compassion on her and healed, and raised her son from the dead. Anyway, then we also see the repentant sinner woman who anointed Jesus' feet. We're going to talk about that in a little while. A few of the stories I picked it up for further consideration and further discussion later on in this reflection. And then we have very uniquely the women who traveled with Jesus. Nowhere in the other Gospels that we're told that there were women who traveled with Jesus, apart maybe later on in Luke, and then of course into the not later on in probably the women traveled with the apostles in the book of Acts, but in this Gospel of Luke, the women traveled with Jesus. I will also consider that in our discussions later, in our conversation later. And then Mary and Martha is a well-known figure in the Gospel, but in this Gospel of Luke, it's recorded very specifically Jesus' visit with Martha and Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Jesus telling her that she's desired the better thing. So this is particular to Luke as well. We also see the woman who spoke to Jesus while he was teaching. He shouted something at Jesus and told her, and then Jesus responded. That's in Luke chapter 11. And then so on and so forth. We have the different people, the different women that Jesus healed, the different words that Jesus addresses to women, and parables, 2 parables that was also attributed to women. And Jesus told the story of the woman who lost her coin and is so happy. And when she found it, that illustrates the concern and joy of God, for those who are lost, using a woman as a positive example of that. And also the parable of the persistent widow and the unjust judge talk about the reward of a prayerful persistence, if I may add, a woman's prayerful persistence that causes prayers to be answered. in a way. And so it is immediately noticeable that Luke's portrayal of women is in a positive light. Furthermore, Jesus' interaction with women were documented as positive, and notably, women were not hostile to Jesus in their encounters with him physically. And remarkably, the opening chapters of Luke, chapter 1 and 2, the nativity scene and the prophecy of the coming Messiah features strong leading women in the story. At the coming of the Messiah that will be born. And the women were put in the forefront in the character development. It showcases the demonstration of their faith, their obedience, and their submission to God, you know, and their faithfulness to God, you know, to what He will do in the fullness of time. So we see that the portrayal is there, and then from the Gospel of Luke as well, several key stories in Jesus' ministry involve women that reveals his compassion for women. Some of that I have illustrated to us in the list that I gave you. His countercultural views of them, you know, we'll unpack that a little bit in our reflection. And also their ability to participate in God's work. So we'll see a little bit of that. If you have a chance to read the Gospel of Luke, you will probably find it out as well. Okay. There's some exemplary traits of women in the scriptures that are portrayed in art and tradition. I love art, and I'm sure that you will get a chance to, if you get a chance to go to different parts of the world in UK, some in US, and also in France and various parts of Europe, you will see lots of portrayal of religious art. And in it, a lot of women were portrayed. A lot of women in the history of the church were portrayed, and also women in the scriptures as well were portrayed in art form. Two of the most famous ones that well, not the most famous ones, and ironically, I have not actually seen them. I've actually seen others, but there are two art portrayals that I would like to point out to us. This art portrayal talks about the two characters in the book of Luke, and one of them is Mary Magdalene. Also, Mary Magdalene is featured in the other Gospels as well. And then I will also show you the art portrayal of Mary, the mother of Jesus. So the first portrayal is Mary Magdalene, that is portrayed as what is described in this artwork called the Penitent Magdalene. It's a 17th century art that is painted by Carlo Docci. And this particular portrayal seems to come from Luke 7. Luke chapter 7, and it's interesting because as we will talk about later, Luke 7 is no longer attributed to, or the sinful woman in Luke 7 is no longer seen as Mary Magdalene. A lot of scholars have refuted that that she's Mary Magdalene, but she's just an unknown sinful woman in Luke 7. But in the early years, in the medieval times and in the 17th century, the interpretation seemed to be that the woman in Luke 7 is identified as Mary Magdalene. Of course, we know Mary Magdalene is also important in the scripture narrative as one of the key resurrection witness, and then also she. So the assigned for her, the most important role in Christian tradition has been of a penitent saint, which would probably take into account the interpretation of Luke chapter 7. And so, which is why it is portrayed here in this art of this title, The Penitent Magdalene by Carlo Rocci. So it portrays a tearful, haunted woman that urgently prays to the heavens to seek salvation and to seek forgiveness. And this, in looking at this painting, for a lot of Christians, for a lot of people who look at this piece of art, a lot of Christians and the church look at this art, Mary Magdalene, appears to be an approachable figure, someone who is like the rest of us, not perfect, and in a sense, a model of faith. And so this portrait this art portrait portrays Mary Magdalene as a woman that is a model for faith, a woman that is penitent, a woman that seeks and turns her eyes and her attention to God. And there. Okay, so this is the first one. And the next one is, of course, Mary, the mother of Jesus. I think Mary, the mother of Jesus, probably has the most portrayal in art forms. I've seen them myself. in some of the not so famous paintings and artists in France. I've seen many of them actually when I was in Paris. And but this is one of the most famous one that is painted by Raphael. Anyone, I'm sure some of you may be familiar with that. I've not seen it myself personally, but it seems to be one of the most famous ones. You know, of course, Mr. Google tells you all this kind of things, and so he did tell me that too. So I looked at it. The Sistine Madonna is this art piece, and it's painted by Raphael in Raphael. I call him Raphael in 1512. You know, and you can see the clarity of his art in the time of the Baroque. The clarity of the form, serenity, and harmony that shows Mary as the perfect mother, you know, and the son Jesus there, holding the child. There are many other portrayals as well of Mary in different aspects of the Luke story of chapter 1 and 2. This is one of them, whereby when she gives birth, you know, she holds the baby. There are two winged cherubs that are beneath Mary, and apparently they are portrayed as the most famous cherubs that are depicted in any picture. And so Mary is portrayed favorably here as the mother of Jesus, and also portrayed favorably as a woman who is favored by God, who is faithful to God in this picture here. And so in church history tradition, women has been portrayed favorably as well by the different depictions, through the different depictions in the art form. Okay, so just to give you, after this quick introduction, I'm going to move into the main gist of our reflection today. And in the next 30 minutes, I would like to invite us to together reflect on the issues, the themes, contemporary women encounter in the different spaces, integrated into a reading of the Gospel of Luke, of women encountering Jesus. From my devotional reading of Luke and in conversations with various biblical scholars, case studies of women encountering Jesus, I built on these selected stories, the selected case studies, and also in conversation with the various biblical scholars, and also with different pastoral theologians, and also with the Christian writers. So as I build on this and to bring that reflection together, I'm taking an approach of a devotional reading, and also to encounter the different themes and issues that contemporary women may face today. And so as we do that, I pray that you will encounter Jesus afresh during this season of Advent, and as the women encountered him in the Gospel of Luke, that you and I will encounter him afresh as we tackle through and wrestle through some of the issues that have been important and that have been a challenge in our lives, our culture, and the spaces that we inhabit in a way. So I'm told that the main audience are women, and which is what I expected. And I also want to greet some of the names that I'm familiar with. I saw some of that, our AOIC friends as well, who have also decided to come and participate and to support me, our students, our alumni, and some of them. So I greet you, and as the main audiences are women, which I did expect in my discussion with Vivian. So that's all right. That's the main crux of my reflection. It is two women. But in the same vein, I invite those men that are present to listen into the conversations, and perhaps also to join in the conversations later as we go into time of question and answer, or even to discuss and to lend in your comments as well. All right. So as I move into this first issue, as we reflect together during the season of Advent and encounter of Jesus with the women, the first issue that I would like to raise is the issue of women and her identity. Woman and her identity. So the question is, who are you? Who am I as a woman? Who am I as a woman of faith? Who are you as a Chinese woman of faith in Malaysia? So with that question, very quickly, I want to build on a definition by David Benner, a psychologist and author of the book, The Gift of Being Yourself. From that book, he defines identity as who we experience ourselves to be, the I that each one of us carries within. Who we experience ourselves to be, the I that each one of us carries within. And an important issue that relates to a woman's identity space is the issue of shame. The issue of shame. And I would say a pretty big issue for women. These recently coined gendered terms, body shaming, and for a lack of better word, excuse me, I would say slut shaming in social media speak volumes about shame that many women may have been subjected to. When I read the Gospel of Luke, one key story stands out in the reflection on identity and shame, an encounter with Jesus. Before I go into that, I just want to kind of build some foundation on this first. I just want to unpack a little bit on the understanding of shame. Several years ago, Brené Brown, some of you will call her Brené Brown, but Brené Brown, she is by now a famous author and writer on the books on vulnerability, courage, and shame. She started off researching on connection. And in her research, she stumbled upon and observed many of her respondents. And interestingly, more of them were women participants who actually were talking about shame in their lives and in who they are. When she asked them specific questions for her research, she posed them certain scenarios and certain questions for her research, and this is what she got. This is according to her words, I believe. And she says that when you ask people about love, they tell you about heartbreak. When you ask people about belonging, they will tell you about excruciating experiences of exclusion. When you ask people about connection, they will tell you about disconnection. Okay. And so for her, she was thrown off by some of these responses that she was getting, as she was building her research through grounded theory. And so she really went back to it and really listened to the data. And and she really found that at the heart of it, it was this woman and a lot of men too were talking about shame in their lives in a way. And so as I prepared for this reflection, I found myself Googling this question: do women face more shame? Do women face more shame? It's a question that's probably somewhat controversial, and there are a few more controversial questions that may also come up as well as we continue on in this reflection. So do women face more shame? I will converse more about it shortly, but right now I will be interested in your response on shame and women's identity. So let's move on to our next Slido. The next Slido question that I will be putting out here, and it is this: do women face shame? Do women face more shame? All right. So let me put this up and let me quickly do this. So I'm waiting for the responses, and I've got 32 now, and we will have more of it coming in as well. As the voting and the polling continues, I'm just going to go ahead and say a little bit more. According to Brené Brown, shame causes people to feel trapped, powerless, and isolated. That will be her definition from her research. And I would further add that all these words may be seen as identity-related words. And Brown further asserts that for women, there are whole constellations of often contradictory expectations. That word is, I'm sure, very familiar with all of us. Constellations of contradictory expectations that, if not met, will become sources of shame. Different contradictory expectations that we face in our society, that we face in our families, that we face in being part of this nation, being part of this culture, being a part of the church traditions that we are at. And so if they're not met, these contradictory expectations, they become sources of shame in our lives, and it eats at the core of our identity. And so in any case, for those who grow up with shame, may this poignant story that Luke tells frees you and I to be who you and I can be in God's sight. Okay, I'm going to pause it before going into the story. We're going to take the results of the poll. All right, I'm going to stop the results. I'm going to stop the polling here and take the results. And as I look at the results of this poll, do women face more shame? There are three options there. Yes, as a woman, no, not gender related, and never zero. So it seems to tell us overwhelmingly, and I'm sure you're seeing that on your screen as well, that women do face more shame. And that is something that it is anecdotally understood and anecdotally observed, but there is not much research grounded, the grounded theory of that, but it's not much scientific research and statistics that has been developed with regard to that. And so women do face more shame in issues of identity. And so let's just talk about this poignant story, I would say, that Luke tells in Luke chapter 7, verse 36 to 50. Luke chapter 7, verse 36 to 50. And the way that we're going to do this is that if you have your Bibles open, or if you have your Bible Gateway software on your computer screen, you can quickly go to that and you can quickly kind of and go to the story. So it is a story of the sinful woman who anoints Jesus' feet, or in the New Testament, in the NIV version that I'm having in my Bible right now, it's Jesus anointed, the story of Jesus anointed by a sinful woman. I think you get the idea. And very quickly, it is a story that I will just read maybe the first part of it or not. I'm just going to run through that very fast, okay? So the story is told of a Pharisee who invited Jesus to have dinner with him. And so Jesus went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table, we're told. Then when the woman who lived a sinful life in the city, as in that town, as Luke describes it, heard that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she quickly came, brought a alabaster jar of perfume, and stood behind him, weeping, and began to wipe his feet, washing his feet with tears, and then anointing Jesus' feet with perfume, kissing them, and so on and so forth. This poignant story of a woman that is, just reading this, if you have a chance to read this after the session is over, it is such a descriptive part of the passage that Luke portrays, and there's so much that you can read into it. Not that we want to read into scriptures, but there's so much of the what is not said in this passage that we can read about. So this woman, as I said earlier, is not to be confused with Mary Magdalene, although there are many Bible scholars and early church fathers that have sought to identify this woman as Mary Magdalene, but she's not to be confused with her. She's not the Mary Magdalene in the other chapters of the gospel and also in the other gospels. So the crux of the story here clearly is this: the host was uncomfortable as he identifies this woman as someone who is like a prostitute. Luke describes her as a sinful woman. She's definitely an unsavory character. They call her, as again I said, Luke called her a sinner. That sinner that was living a sinful life in that town. And worse still, she gate crashes the party. She was definitely not invited. Jesus was invited by the host, who we come to know of his name later. The host, his name is Simon. The woman, the unnamed woman, gate crashes the party, acted unbecoming in the presence of Jesus, or appears to act unbecoming to the host in the presence of Jesus, stood behind Jesus and washes Jesus' feet with her tears and her perfume. Okay. You can see a picture of the sinful woman who felt isolated because no one wanted to connect with her. She stood off to the side near Jesus. This woman felt powerless to change the perceptions about her, and which led her to be isolated as well, and that is also the status that she found herself in, which they called her as a sinful woman, a woman of loose morals and whatever that may be. In Brown's definition, this woman is mired in shame. Okay? And so something else needs to be said about the depth of emotion that's displayed by the woman. Luke tells us that she did not utter a word at all while Jesus and his host were talking about her. Luke describes poignantly that she cried tears on Jesus' feet, and it mingled together with the perfume, at his feet. That much tears tell you that it comes from a deep place of regret, a deep place of pain, and somewhere along the line, a sense of relief when she encountered Jesus as the one who has taken away all the shame in her life. The words that Jesus uttered, "Your sins are forgiven," in a later part of the passage here, clearly speaks to us of the removal and the forgiveness of guilt. But yet, there is more than that. According to a pastoral theologian and interacted with this material in preparation for this, Ray Anderson, who wrote about shame and guilt in one of his volumes in pastoral theology, he says this: the removal of guilt may not remove the feelings of shame. And I think we can understand that. We may be free from guilt, but yet feelings of shame will continue to plague us. He gives the example, and I can certainly resonate with the example. It is that, you get a parking ticket, you pay for it, or you resolve all that, your guilt is free. But yet, somewhere down the line, or for some, there is still that feeling of shame that you actually got a parking ticket or a ticket for violation in a way. Okay? So there is the removal of guilt, but yet, it may not remove the feelings of shame. Ray Anderson further says that shame has to do with a loss to one's identity and being, and that's the very core that needs to be restored and needs to be recovered in a way. And long after the guilt has been removed objectively, one can still be caught in the dehumanizing grip of shame. Divine forgiveness, as Anderson says, as was offered by Jesus to the woman, his thoughts are helpful for us in the sense that the purpose of divine forgiveness that Anderson talks about, that is given to us, that is given to the woman by Jesus, is not only to pardon sin as a legal or objective fault, but to overcome shame, which has weakened and destroyed the inner fabric of self. To overcome shame that has weakened and destroyed the inner fabric of self. The label that the woman has to wear, Luke describes it as, that I just mentioned earlier on, the woman in town who was a sinner. I'm sure that you can think of those labels if you were in the story as well, had in mind many of the different labels. Perhaps she may be called as an immoral, a home wrecker, whatever it is, until Jesus affirms her as a daughter of the kingdom by uttering further these words, "Your faith has saved you," at the end of the chapter, towards the end of the chapter. Your faith has saved you to that sinful woman. It is a powerful statement of removal of shame and a recovery of her identity. I found additional value in Brown's writings, which can relate to the understanding of shame and identity in the story here of the sinful woman who anointed Jesus' feet. She says this, vulnerability is the courage to show up when you cannot control the outcome. And I thought that was a very, very powerful statement as you look at the woman, at the sinful woman who came to Jesus. Vulnerability is the courage to show up when you cannot control the outcome. And Luke shows us this of the woman who came, who gate crashed the party, who probably, was told to get out or may not be, but she gate crashed the party. She was not able to control her outcome, but she persisted and she came to Jesus. Perhaps there's also something to be said here about her vulnerable encounter, the sinful woman's vulnerable encounter with Jesus that transformed her shame to strength and to courage. Think about that. Okay. I come back here to sum up some of the key shame issues that women face in identity space that are related to. And as before we go into that, let me do one more poll in this discussion. And this poll is this: what sort of shame a woman feel or experience? Before I sum it up and describe a few of these that are prevalent in our community and our society, I'd like to hear from you. What sort of shame a woman feel or experience? I've just activated the poll, and I'd like you to put your thoughts into it, and then we'll take a look at the word cloud that comes out of that. What sort of shame a woman feel or experience? The two key shame issues that I've reflected on are these two. Number one is the stigma and shame of women that they carry around in their past, family, and different status. A very common elephant in the room stigma that many women carry is the stigma of divorce. It's an elephant in the room. Nobody talks about it, but the stigma is as real as it is for those women, particularly who have been divorced. So my first example relates to that. I've heard stories and insinuations that divorced women are damaged goods forever. I'm sorry, I have to put some harsh statements out there, but they are viewed as damaged goods and no longer useful, I don't know the word to use, but they are damaged goods in a way. The other stigma that women do carry, and scriptures intimate that the issue of barrenness. Many women suffer silently, and you see that in also the accounts and narratives of scripture. So divorce and barrenness that seems to really rob a woman of her identity as a woman and as a woman of God. So the stigma that some have to carry as a result of the past, family, and different status, or whatever that may be. So let me look at some of your answers quickly as you do that. Okay, singlehood. Singlehood is yes. I will not really talk about that in detail. Not being good enough. That's an interesting one. We'll talk about the issue of worth in the next reflection. Okay, no position in the family. No position in the family. That's pretty true. Okay. Weight and fat. Yes, certainly fat. Weight, body shaming it's a big issue. I talked about divorce, and somebody has actually also pointed out divorce. And then clothing, interesting. Being female in a patriarchal society, a patriarchal family, I think that's what you're saying. Failure to meet expectations. Okay. Some of these relates to issues of worth in that way. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Okay. So it's still less than half of those who voted. Maybe some of you are not keen to poll. That's all right. Just going to wait 1 more minute or just a little bit more for you to poll. I move on to talk about issue of expectations and issues of vulnerability. More so, I think it relates to the issue of expectations. Oftentimes, unrealistic expectations in terms of how the different kinds of expectations upon women. As a woman, as in our Asian culture. And so there are unrealistic expectations for that. And so what they are, I think you and I will know some of that in our spaces that we inhabit as a woman, particularly in that way. Okay, I'm going to shut this down, the poll, and we will take a look at the results. So as you look at the results, you will see that the shame that a woman feel or experience, I think some of the words that came out in bigger caps are divorced, sexual wrongdoings, singlehood, not being good enough. I hope that you're seeing that which I'm seeing. Okay, so you see all this in big letters, probably shows us that it's been referenced to by different ones more than once. That. Okay, so we'll hold on to that, and we'll come back to that again in a while in this next reflection. A final thought that I have for this reflection on women and her identity space is this. It has to do with the shame and recovery of identity as a goal of living our lives in Christ. I invite into the conversation this person, C. Norman Krauss, is another theologian and a biblical scholar. He suggests that restoration of identity is a process that must take place through communication and through community. Two things that's important, a process that must take place through communication and through community. And where shame isolates, recovery must restore relations, and is done through communication and community. And you see that, the nuance of that in Luke's story of the sinful woman and Jesus and her encounter with Jesus. Jesus was not only present with her, and he did not utter those words privately. Your faith has saved you. Your sins are forgiven. He did not utter those words privately. In the presence of a community of people, Simon and the group at the party who perhaps see themselves as more upright and righteous, Jesus communicated those healing words and actions, empowering that woman to love and be loved, removing the source of her shame as a human being and as a woman. And so as we reflect on the story, as we reflect on women and her identity, if Vivian can put up the slide. So my reflection for us is this: the sinful woman's encounter with Jesus removes shame and transforms her identity. Where in the secret places of our hearts and our communities that Jesus needs to transform? where in the secret places of our hearts and our communities that Jesus needs to transform. Some thoughts for us as we reflect on this first point here. I'm going to move on quickly now to talk about women and her value, or woman and her worth. Let's together reflect on this. And as in my introductory comments on Jewish men's prayer of thanks that God did not create them as women, it may be said that Jewish culture during Jesus' time assigns lesser value or worth in some aspect to women. From my readings and research, quite a few biblical commentaries and scholars acknowledge this point, that during the time of the Jewish culture, during the Jesus time, do assign to a certain extent lesser value and worth to women. And today, many cultures continue to consign women to specific spaces in community and society, and thereby oftentimes perceived and seen as lessening the value of a woman. Those of us who grew up in urban cultures will roll our eyes at some of the archaic mindsets and practices, that we have heard, that we have seen in the past, that would appear to assign women to a lesser and limited role and responsibility. And yet many of them would still exist in the different communities till to present in a way. So so a good example is one that the woman and her value, I think I can make it as an example. It's a recent ruling that we read, that we will read about women who cannot, what is the word? Let me pull out that news piece to share with you. It's this ruling recently by the government that women, cannot confer nationality on children due to national security. I think Frances recently sent that to me. She's in this meeting as well. She sent that to me, and I thought, yeah, it really speaks of that. There is still that what is used as the word as discrimination by the news pieces. It really speaks about the reduction or the lessening of a woman's worth because she cannot confer. In this case, not that she cannot confer, but because it's children born of women who married foreign nationals, Malaysian women do not have any kind of status to confer nationality on their children in that way. And so can I share this right now? Thank you. So this is the news piece that I'm referring to. Of course, there are reasons to put it. There are reasons that have been given by the different people. And just read it quickly. I didn't have a chance to finish reading it. And interestingly, there are at least what is said by Hannah Yeoh, one of the former deputy minister of Family, Community and Development. Estimated 40,000 applications pending for seeking citizenship for their children, and that has not been, and that is the ruling that they cannot do that. And of course, Suhakam and some of the women's groups are saying that this is discrimination against women, that they do not have equal rights as compared to men in Malaysia. So this is one of those examples that we see of women being assigned a lesser worth. Jesus, this particular woman's interaction with Jesus shows us how much Jesus values her in this particular one story here. And we read this of a story of healing of a woman that is disabled by a spirit in Luke chapter 13. Story of a woman that is disabled, that Jesus healed this woman who was disabled by a spirit, evil spirit. And I think in the NIV version, it says a crippled woman healed on the Sabbath. So it's taken from Luke chapter 13, verses 10 to 16. There. So if you have that, you can direct to Luke chapter 13, verse 10 to 16 in your scriptures, wherever that you are viewing it from. Okay, so very quickly, let me just quickly read this. It says, as he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, a woman was there who had been disabled by a spirit for over 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called out to her, "Woman, you are free of your disability." Then he laid his hands on her, and instantly she was restored and began to glorify God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, responded by telling the crowd, "There are 6 days when work should be done. Therefore, come on those days and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "Hypocrites, Doesn't each one of you untie his ox or donkey from the feeding trough on the Sabbath and lead it to water? Satan has bound this woman, a daughter of Abraham, for 18 years. Shouldn't she be untied from this bondage on the Sabbath day? I think the story speaks for itself, and Jesus' high value of women is especially significant in this story here. The story vividly portrays, I read just now, a woman who's faced with an infirmity or crippled in the sense that she's bent over, more accurately, for 18 years, to the point that she could not talk to people like a normal human being, just bent over. Some of the other parts that I read talked about her being bent over and could not straighten up, which is also said in this verse 11 here. So she could not talk to people like a normal human being. Jesus heals this woman on Sabbath, and then you read about the synagogue leader who rebukes him for it, telling him to heal on the other 6 days of the week, not on the Sabbath. And Jesus then responds that no better day exists to heal than the Sabbath, and calls the woman with a specific high value term that Luke records first here. Calls her a daughter of Abraham, a daughter of Abraham. Calls her daughter of Abraham, which is found in verse 16. Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, be set free on the Sabbath from what had bound her? Luke underscores the worth of this woman as the daughter of Abraham, and her well-being is greater than the Sabbath. And then you see what Jesus did. He further contrasts the leaders, the synagogue leaders' indignation at the woman's healing with a Jew's readiness to untie cattle, feed them at the manger, and lead them to water on Sabbath. So if they can do that for an animal or cattle, on the Sabbath, what more a woman that is precious, a daughter of Abraham that is precious to God? And so that was asked as a rhetorical question in a way, and so in this regard, as what they say, the leaders are condemned by their own practice because they show compassion to animals, but not to humans, especially to a woman that has been crippled, has been bent over for 18 years. There were some biblical interpreters that missed Jesus' point by arguing that Jesus' retort is not relevant, since he could have indeed waited a day to heal. What's wrong with healing the day after Sabbath? Jesus' point is very pointed here. If you from the text that we read, how can an animal be treated with more concern on the sacred day than a person? How can an animal be treated with more concern on a sacred day than a person? Okay. And as she was bound for 18 years, she should be loosed from this bondage. Even more than the ox should be loosed on the Sabbath to eat and to drink. You see the difference here, the contrast here between the views of Jesus and the leaders, the synagogue leaders. The difference could not be greater. And everything, in Jesus' argument that is laid out here point by point by Luke, affirmed the woman's value. She is a daughter of Abraham. When Jesus calls her the daughter of Abraham, it implies that she had equal status with the sons of Abraham. We're not going to go deeper into that terminology, but the implication is that she has equal status with the sons of Abraham. I don't think this terminology repeats itself again, but it is very significant that it appears here in Luke chapter 13 to refer to this woman that has been bent over for 18 years. And it seemed to be a designation that is created by Jesus as well, because it occurs nowhere else in the Bible. Okay. So as we think about this, women, Jesus assigns higher value to women and sees them differently. And so as we continue on, when we bring these stories of encounter of the crippled women and integrate that to our understanding and encounters of women today, I submit that there will be still women of faith who will face issues of worth and expectations, primarily issues of value, even in Christian families. And some of it we see it as being some of you have commented in the response that you're seen as lesser in the family. So I'm not sure exactly what that means, but that certainly can be true, especially if you are from a very highly patriarchal family. There are others that talked about not being good enough as well. There must be a reason why you said that. There must be behaviors and characterizations that you have seen and that you've encountered, that you've experienced, that would lead you to come to that conclusion of not being good enough, of not being valuable enough. Some of these things that take place that lessen the value of women is, first of all, commodification and objectification. Like, these are big words, but they basically mean this. First one, a commodification. Let me give you an example. A friend tells me that her father has this philosophy that women are like water that will be splashed out. I'm sure I am reproducing this in a way that she actually meant it, and I forgive me if I'm not. Women are like water in a Chinese kind of a saying that will be splashed out. It's not worth to educate girls because they will eventually get married, have babies, and take care of kids. So why the need to spend all that money only to not get the kind of returns commercially, economically, or that it's no longer a part of the family as well. So that's one aspect of commodification of women, and I'm sure many of you have stories that you can tell, some good, some sad, about commodification of women, and perhaps some of us who have experienced that as well. The next one is objectification. I use the example of this example. Many families expect that women will be also baby machines. Okay? I'm sorry if I would say it a little bit in a crude way, but women are also to be baby makers in a way. I started watching this Korean TV series to distract myself from stress, and I ended up reflecting on the portrayal of women in that series. Although this series appeared to be progressive in their portrayal of women, there is still that fixation on descendants to carry on the family line, with the expectation of women to produce healthy offspring. Women have to produce healthy offspring. How many times have you heard from friends? Have you heard from, or maybe even it's your own personal story of how the blame of not being able to have children falls primarily on women? I have had experiences within my immediate circles of friends and family, that the blame of not being able to have children, blame that falls primarily on women, although it takes two to make a baby. But generally, women has to go through all kinds of invasive tests first to ascertain whether the fault lies with them or not. And then of course, you also have mothers who think that their son has no defect. Their daughters-in-law are the ones that have defective product. It's a real enough situation. Don't crucify me. You probably have heard this in your own context as well. And these are some of these aspects, examples of commodification, objectification that women assigned to, that speaks lesser of their value and their worth as a woman. Okay. One more thing, conjectures and biblical interpretations that sometimes reinforce commodification of women, and this is more theologically driven as well. The often portrayal of the Proverbs 31 woman during Mother's Day is a powerful acknowledgement of a woman or a mother's godly virtues until they are pushed as a gold standard of a woman's worth. In some years when I started reading Proverbs 31, honestly, I felt kind of ashamed because I cannot even meet half of the values and half of what it was described of the Proverbs 31 women, the godly virtues in there. I felt shame. I felt ashamed. I felt like, wow, I cannot match up in that way. And I've also come across a few women biblical scholars' reactions to this in their attending expectations of this woman that would elicit shame to women who will not be able to meet, many of these virtues and expectations in real life. And so while there are good standards to look at and to appreciate and to remember, women who have exemplified that, it should not be pushed as a gold standard of a woman's worth in real life. You can probably you probably want to question me on that, but that's where I would say when we talk about the whole commodification and objectification of women, even theologically and in some of our faith traditions. I think. And also, what is that which is theologically and biblically enforced would be the fact that women are spiritually ignorant. They do not have wisdom or discernment. I think I talked about this with some of my friends, and then we concluded that oftentimes also, and I think in some of our churches, women are seen as spiritually ignorant. They do not have wisdom or discernment, and which is why the story of Mary sitting at Jesus' feet to learn spiritual truths, or Anna, who's a prophet and spends a good part of her life in the temple praying. These are powerful images of a woman's spiritual worth, a woman who's able to have a relationship with God, who's able to have discernment, who's able to have wisdom, who's able to expound, God's truth in a way. Okay, and I suspect that many Christian women continue to struggle with self-acceptance, a lack of self-worth, as each one navigates expectations of different roles and different responsibilities, expectations and pronouncements upon you. Only you know what they are and peculiar to you. God knows that I had, in my early days as a believer coming from a traditional family, my value and my define was defined and negotiated in certain expectations as a not only as a woman, but as a firstborn in a Chinese family. And so I've had to also struggle through that and wrestle through that in the past. And so this Advent season, as we await the coming Messiah, Jesus looks upon each of you and affirms your worth as a woman, a daughter of the King, and we can wait with hope and transformation and freedom in the spaces that we inhabit. As we reflect on this issue, I pose a question, which Vivian, if you can put that on a slide, is this: what are some spaces that Jesus needs to transform in our culture and in our society and our churches today to affirm and to empower the worth of a woman of faith? What are some spaces that Jesus needs to transform in our culture and society and our churches today to affirm and to empower the worth of a woman of faith? Right, I leave that with you. And I do have one more point, but I think I'm running out of time already, which is women and her resources. I thought I wanted to pick this as the last reflection for today. And what I would say about this is that women do bring economic gifts and do bring generosity into the economic space. In the depiction of Jesus with the women who were traveling with him, and also in the story of the woman with the widow and her mites in a way. And so women can and are able to bring their economic gifts and generosity into the economic space. And I will not go into the passage, but well, okay, let's not do the last thing on Slido. So the last thing I want to say about this is from the stories of the women who supported Jesus' ministry and the widow. I wanted to point out to us that, and in this reflection, that women have the capabilities of giving and generosity. And Jesus transforms these gifts for the work of the kingdom and for the preaching of the gospel, very clearly as we see that. And so women in the gospels that have been portrayed as recipients of financial help and generosity, they are capable as well of organizing and are generous stewards of economic resources for the work of the kingdom. And so with that, the last slide that I would like to put up is this. The first question is this: is it, if it's true that women are statistically more generous than men, which I wanted to point it out to us earlier on, but I think the time is running out. I think the question for us, our reflection is, how may we and our community increase women's voice and participation in meetings about funding vision or driving fundraising initiatives to make an impact for God's work? How may we and our community increase women's voices and participation? It is seen that there is quite a lack of participation of women in the aspect of economic space and the generosity of stewarding the resources for the work of the kingdom. And then the last question is this: how may income inequality be overcome to enable women to share their gifts of giving and generosity? In this case, for a Christian woman to participate fully in the work of the kingdom through generosity and capacity in financial resources. I think I've rewrote the question a little bit, but how may that be overcome to enable women, to participate fully in the work of the kingdom through being able to have more capacity to share, to care, and to to generate resources for the work of the kingdom. And so as we look at this question, these are two questions that I would like us to think about in terms of the women and her economic resource space. And certainly that much more can be talked about that as we explore, and maybe sometime in the future, I would be glad to explore that further. As I come to a close of this reflection, may I specifically address the women in this audience? I know there are men as well in this audience, but may I specifically address the women in the audience? My prayer is that Jesus will meet you in the different spaces of your lives, that God will speak into your lives divine affirmation, that God will do a divine work of restoration and wholeness in your lives, to be fully human, to be fully woman, and as a daughter of God. Our God who is present in our lives and birth, our God who's present in our lives and also who birth hope in our hearts, is also the God who loves you and I as his beloved. I end with this, and I will turn the time back over to Vivian.
Okay, so it's time for our Q&A, and I think we have quite a few questions. What is your view about 1 Timothy 12, 1-2 for women who shouldn't preach at church? Should women be pastors and preachers of church, or they should follow the scriptures? Thank you. So I think this one is a controversial questions that has been around for a long time. So people have got different views, and a balanced view, I think it's needed.
I would like, actually, first of all, my counterpart, who is a New Testament scholar, to weigh in on this, Dr. Lim Kayong. If you can assist in this discussion and in this comment, in this question that we have in terms of scriptural interpretation and scriptural text.
Hi everyone. I think you can see me now. Now, this question about women preaching. Let me just take the question at its face value. I personally don't think that Paul, if you take Paul as the author of 1 Timothy, again, that is the Pauline authorship of 1 Timothy is a controversial issue. Let's just take it as Paul. I have no issue accepting Paul as the author. I don't think Paul is addressing the issue of women being pastors or preachers in churches. I think Paul is addressing the situation in Ephesus, addressing Timothy to address issues in the church in Ephesus. So if you want to look at the bigger picture, I would suggest two approaches to this. One, are we willing to accept that in this letter of Paul to 1 Timothy, is Paul addressing a universal problem that is across, flattened or complex? That means it is addressed across the board, or is this issue that Paul is addressing to Timothy in relation to the church in Ephesus, because this is written to Timothy in Ephesus, addressing the specific situation in Ephesus? That is the first question I think we need to come to understanding. If not, we'll be talking, we're all going around the way. So I just leave these thoughts with you first, for all of us to think through. So in terms of application, can we directly apply what Paul says here as women as pastors in the church? Is Paul addressing women pastors back then? That would be another issue for us to think about first, right? So I'll just throw some questions for us to think. Okay, now probably that's all I will probably have to say. Maybe I'm sure Siew Pik will have more to do. I don't want to steal too much time away. Over to you, Siew Pik.
I think I'm going to answer from a more of an experiential kind of a pastoral perspective, a pastoral theology perspective. So I used to tell the stories to some friends that, when in my youth days, I really had a case of I was a youth leader then, and I had a case of a teenage boy came up to me and threw this passage in my face, in the sense like women should not be preaching, kind of thing, in a way there. So rather more like women have to be silent, I think. So I'm not sure what the person means by this. We did not have any conflict or whatever, but I don't know whether he's implying that I should be silent, I should not be leading, I should not be talking. But I left it as that. But that incident continued to stay with me, where I have this set in my face that women should be silent, they should not be in the church teaching, kind of thing. So I have to reconcile that with the fact that my calling to the ministry, and God specifically calls me into the ministry. I know that. I mean, just as any man or woman, pastors or preachers, I know that God specifically called me into the ministry of teaching and preaching. And so, so for me, you know, in wrestling through this passage and over the years, as I sat through different biblical scholars, it's a very situational thing. The context needs to be really, really extracted in order for us to understand what the author or Paul in 1 Timothy actually talks about for women to using the statement that women shouldn't preach at church. Because in reality, God do call a lot of women preachers. I mean, I'm one of them. I teach extensively, quite a bit, and I know many of my friends and missionaries and teachers and are prominent women pastors and leaders. So I throw back the question: Did women hear wrongly, or did God make the wrong choice? That's the question.
That's a good one. That's really good to think about. For many years, I've been holding on to the view that women should teach or preach in church. But I think over the years, things have changed, and I've seen that God also working with His gift in my life and how I can use it to benefit others. So yeah, there's more to learn in this subject. So thank you very much for both, from the historical, contextual point of view, and also from experiential point of view. So let's take a look at next one. Why did Jesus choose only male disciples? Why not a female? And I think this is a good one. My guess is it may have something to do with the Jewish culture at that time, but maybe shed some light on this.
That's a good question to that. There are some people who would take the Luke 8 passage about women following Jesus, that he would also consider them as part of the band of disciples that follow him. But you know, certainly we do read of specific narratives in the accounts that Jesus specifically chose the 12. But you know, in a kind of like roundabout way, Luke 8, where that passage that I did want to expound about, you know, women supporting Jesus. They were also traveling with him, and they were basically doing the work of the ministry together with Jesus, as with also the other male disciples as well. So they were taught specifically, you know, for a reason, but yet there were also other female disciples in the Gospel of Luke that we are led to see from Luke's writings. Dr. Lim Ka-yong, if you are able to give a more technical aspect to that, I would appreciate too. This is just my thought from a quick reading of this understanding of male and disciples.
I think if you look at it, I think I sort of agree with what Siew Pik say. If you look at the scripture, there were actually female followers of Jesus, right? Yeah. And the male disciples are one of the 12. That means that's a specific category we call the 12. Other than that, they are female disciples. And I think they were the one who contributed to the ministry of Jesus. We read from the gospel, they contributed financially, and they were to be the first that witnessed the historic resurrection account.
So, yes. And that also, I haven't unpacked that yet as well.
According to the Jewish culture, women's testimony it's not admissible in the courts of law. And yet in the gospel, who is the first one who announced the resurrection of Jesus? Women. I think that is significant, that the Lord allows women to be the first witnesses, and they were told to go and tell the disciples. The first women preachers, if you want to put it that way, that attest to the resurrection account, if you see it from that perspective. And that's in Luke, the last chapters of Luke, the resurrection account, very clearly that Luke points out the women. Yes, I didn't have time to unpack that, but there was one of those things that I wanted to unpack as well. There must be a reason that the Gospels focus quite prominently on the choosing of the 12, which I think that's probably the context of the question there. Could you speak a little bit to it, Dr. Lim or Vivian, on the specific choosing of the 12, in this case, the formerly known as the 12 disciples in this regard, in Matthew, Mark, and I think John as well is written there. I think probably it has to do also with the Jewish cultural context of it, right? So I think that is why that is probably reflected in choosing the 12 as male disciples. But that doesn't mean this 12. That doesn't mean there's no female disciples following Jesus. Yeah. So I'll probably see it from that, as I think Ian has stated earlier on.
Okay. Yeah. And I would concur that if you read the the parts of Gospels in the Luke and elsewhere that there were women that were chosen by Jesus to follow him, to walk with him as disciples. So I hope we can agree on that Jesus did not only choose male disciples, and he also chose female disciples. The 12 is consigned to a specific role and specific role in the regard to the overall scheme of God's revelation.
If I can just quickly jump in and just give another different perspective, if you move on Paul's missionary journey, right? We look at Paul's missionary journey. The first woman that was converted in what we call Europe today is actually a female, Lydia. And the first church in Philippi was actually in the home of Lydia and her household specifically. Because remember, if you read Acts chapter 16, when Paul was released from prison after the earthquake,
Right.
Where did he go? He went to the house of Lydia where the church gathers, where the brothers gathers. So in the context of this day, usually a person's, when you meet in a person's home, the person is also a leader of the church in that sense. So if you look at it, you have Lydia
Yes.
home, and she's the first convert when Paul received the Macedonian call and moved to Macedonia. There's northern Greece, which is Europe today, first women convert. So there are snippets of that, just that probably it was not, we often don't pick up the cultural background. I think that was also something pretty significant as well. And don't forget Romans 16, the Phoebe is described. No, Phoebe was a letter carrier, right? In Romans chapter 16, that carries Paul's important letter of Romans to Rome, to Italy. And she was described as a diakonos, that's a Greek word for deacon, from the church in Cenchrea. And I think that's so significant as well. Yeah, just to give us a broader perspective.
Thank you. So good. Let's go on to this question, and I think this one has to do with the lecture you just delivered earlier. How can the church counter the shame culture in our society? Maybe just a 1-2 pointer.
Okay, I haven't really thought about this. How can the church counter the shame culture in our society? First of all, we have to identify what are some shame aspects, shame narratives, and shame words that are used in our society. I mean, okay, there were actually. So how can the church counter doing that? The church needs to counter that. I think first of all, we have to start then with exemplifying counterculturally what society is not. Does that make sense? So Jesus did that, and basically, if you read further in particularly the book of Luke as well, the Gospel of Luke, that Jesus chose not to do what is expected, or how women are treated in society and how women are treated in the culture in that way. So to model it, I think as a church, that which is critical or that which is particularly damaging to women in our culture in a way. And there's so many in that way. So there, unless we unpack all of them. So that's the first one. Second one, I think our biblical interpretations need to be probably circumspect as well. Like how I said that we used Proverbs 31 and push that gold standard as expectations and inevitably sometimes it can shame women into thinking that if they don't have all these, then they're not a woman of worth, a woman of God, a woman of faith in that way. So I think that the two critical things would be that to exemplify and to teach scripture circumspectly, about some of these nuances of women and men and worth, identity, and all that. Does that help? At least what I can think of immediately.
Yeah. I think that's really important, and I also thinking along this affirmation, giving affirmation to a woman's worth, love and acceptance, and I think that goes along as well in creating this space to recognize and to correct this shame culture. I think we have just a few more minutes for one more question here, and I think this one would be interesting to go into. Are women meant to be equal partner with Are women meant to be equal partner with men? Are God's views on men and women the same? So I think this one, personally, I would think, yes, we share equal partner. And I know Adam was created first.
Yeah, very interesting theological questions today. This seminar does not really be meant to reflect on, but definitely in the Gospel of Luke, as we're studying that, in Luke's portrayal of the pairs of narratives, men and women together, side by side, Luke was very, very clear in wanting to portray to the audience, to us today, that women are equal recipients of the gospel as with men, the gospel of the good news. So that I can say. The word equal partner, for me, I'm not sure how we define that or how you would define that. Probably Vivian defines that differently. I define that differently. And so it may be a bit harder to get into. But certainly I would say that the partnership in the gospel, there are definitely nuances in the teachings of Jesus and teachings of Paul, that there are equal partnership in that way. In the book of Acts, Luke was very careful to say that, in the last days, that God will pour out his spirit on all flesh, that women will also be the same, will also be the ones who will be able to be bearers of the spirit, as together with men, and women are also together with men will be able to carry forth the mission of Christ into the world. So the book of Acts certainly shows that in the passage of Acts 2, in the giving of the Spirit to the church. Right? So I will speak for that. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, and I think I really do think that equal partnership, it could be in many spaces. At home, it's equal partnership in ministry and in business world. And I think, certainly we share values and we share loads with the men as well. So I think we do have some healthy competition in that way, and it is a lot of equal partnership in a lot of things. Good, that is my personal view. But thank you for this time, and thank you really for sharing with us.
Sure.
In this
my pleasure and honor.
And looking at some of these women, and really opened my eyes, and I haven't really looked at some of these few women that you have mentioned earlier. So it is actually worth to go back to the scriptures and look at their lives and how Christ has made a difference to them. Good. So that actually brings us to the end of our webinar tonight. And I really want to thank everyone for participating, and thank you, both Dr. Lims, actually, in this session with us, and contributing to the learning for all of us and reflections as well. Thank you very much, and I hope this session, this webinar, the insights that Dr. Lim Siew Pik has shared with us, it's going to bless you as we continue to ponder the rest of this evening and also in days to come before we come to 2021. Thank you and have a good night, and we shall hope to see you again, perhaps on Thursday. If you haven't signed up, and let me encourage you to do so. That will be on the men's perspective. Thank you.